In response to the strike at Al-Hali Hospital in Gaza yesterday evening, demonstrators stormed the Israeli consulate in Jordan, while Western embassies were targeted in Turkey, Tunisia and Lebanon, with rioting also breaking out in the West Bank. Turkish President Recep Erdogan accused Western allies of adding fuel to the fire and overlooking Israeli violations and aid blocking. He questioned the intentions of the US, in particular, for its provision of an aircraft carrier to Israel. This week, Downing Street rebuked claims from Conservative MP Crispin Blunt, who claimed that the UK could be complicit in more crimes being committed in Gaza. The allegations follow Israel's warning for the 1.2 million people living in the Gaza Strip to move to the south ahead of a ground invasion. Well, I'm now joined by the political commentator, Lin Mei. Lin, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
No, it's always a pleasure. Israel has the right to respond and a need to respond in self-defence, doesn't it? That's broadly common ground of commentators in the UK.
Yeah, of course, they have a right to defend itself, but at what point do we still see it as defending oneself? Say, for example, if I have had a fight with you and I've punched you, you have a right to defend you. Of course not, but just as an example, and I punch you to beat you up, so to speak, only with my hands, and you go away and you get a gun and you get a knife and you come back to me, you now become the aggressor. I'm not defending myself. Do you understand where I'm coming from? So
yes.
At which point Israel now has to see, when people talk about what is a proportional response, we have seen a lot of people die. We have seen collective punishment be administered where thousands of people are told to move from where they are, not have any water, not have any electricity and not have any food.
Well, we've seen the largest massacre of Jewish people purely for being Jewish since the Holocaust. They weren't punched. They were shot, and they were burnt to death, and babies were murdered, and a Holocaust survivor was kidnapped. That's at the most serious end of attack, isn't it? And therefore, the attack in return, the defence in return, is entitled to be strong.
No, well, I don't think it's an entitlement for them to take the measures that they're taking. As we can see in international law, collective punishment is breaking international law.
But there isn't collective punishment, is there? That's why Israel has told civilians to move and has agreed with the Americans to open a corridor for relief, including for water, to ensure there is water and food and medicine getting into Gaza to the south. But they've warned people to move so that they can go after the terrorists. Surely that's fair.
When they were trying to move, their route was bombed by Israel, firstly. Secondly, only now are we hearing discussions of them being able to have food and water, and those corridors are now being opened up. But there's not much point of those corridors for humanitarian aid if there is no momentarily, position for ceasefire. If they're still going to continue to bomb, then how can you get that aid to millions of people?
But the Israeli position is completely different. They have warned civilians to move away so that they can go after the terrorists. Surely it's fair to go after the terrorists.
But then there's this discussion of the terrorists hiding amongst the civilians. So if that's the case, what would prevent the terrorists from then just moving along with them? And as I said, it was unrealistic to expect, the elderly, children, people in hospital, sick, to move, only have 24 hours, which was partially extended.
They've extended
for 2
it for
million
24
people.
hours, and they've agreed to allow supplies to go in. But I'm glad you're willing to call Hamas terrorists.
Yeah, I have no issues with calling. I am totally, unequivocally against anyone who targets civilians. But then what needs to happen is we need to call that out on both sides.
But Israel's deliberately not targeting civilians. That's the whole point. That's the whole point of giving a warning. It's the whole point of allowing relief supplies in, whereas Hamas uses civilians as human shields.
But if you can see that water initially, electricity and food was prevented from access for 2 million people, would you not say that's collective punishment? Because essentially you're punishing 2 million people with a majority are civilians and children.
But the history of collective punishment is when sabotage was committed to an occupying force, and for every one of their soldiers killed, they killed 10 civilians. That's what collective punishment is about.
Yeah.
It's not about saying that in preparation for an invasion, we are taking away the ability of the enemy to fight. That's just a normal preparation for invasion.
But if we are to see that 2 million civilians can be affected, that is the collective punishment element.
No,
Would you not agree?
No, I wouldn't, because the terrorists are in Gaza. The terrorists need to be removed. The Israelis are doing everything they can to minimise civilian casualties and warning civilians to move.
I don't think they are doing everything that they can, though. If we look at, let's look at a different war crime here. Geneva Article 8 stipulates if you bomb places of worship, it is breaking international law, therefore is a war crime. Israel has admitted to bombing mosques. What would you say about that war crime?
When you are selecting targets, it depends what's going on in that target. That people use all sorts of buildings as cover. But you're basically saying Israel shouldn't do anything. What are they allowed to do, in your view? Do they just have to put up with 2,000 people being killed, 200 hostages being taken?
Of course not, but what we have to look at is the proportion of what them defending themselves is. And I think now we have seen a lot of casualties. If you even look at decades of Palestinian people dying, according to the UN, far more Palestinian civilians have actually died more than Israelis. Now, I don't want to see anyone die, but the reality is what they've done so far is proportionate. Would you not agree when looking at the civilian casualties?
Israel withdrew from Gaza to allow it to be run as an independent state, and Hamas has then run Gaza as a terrorist state to attack Israel. It is not surprising that therefore it's been a very difficult place to live when it's run as a terrorist state.
Of course it's a difficult place to live, and this is why I don't understand when people say, well, why can't they vote out or stand up to Hamas? But when you are living on aid, when you are in an open-air prison, when you haven't had the opportunity to vote since 2006...
This is the policy of Hamas, to ensure that the people of Palestine, people living in Gaza, are kept impoverished because it makes it easier for Hamas to carry out its terrorist acts.
But we keep on talking about, you know, targeting Hamas. I've not seen, obviously it's good to question media, but I've not seen any, you know, specific targeted, you know, points of where they're actually getting Hamas. I'm seeing loads of visuals of children being killed. So at what point do you think that enough is enough where children are dying, visibly dying at the hands of, you know, these sorts of actions by Israel? Where do we stop?
Israel has very sensibly warned people to move so it can go after the terrorists. That's the whole point of its policy. Israel actively does not want to kill children, whereas Hamas actively went in and butchered babies.
But I'm asking
that is the difference.
I'm asking you, at what point do you actually say, at what, because I don't think, if we look at
Israel has to win. That the evil
but winning
Hamas
means
has to be defeated.
Winning in war means a complete extermination
of the fighters.
And you think that can happen?
Of the fighters, but you have to protect the civilian population.
How are they going to target
Israel is
the
trying
fighters?
We are unfortunately out of time, but we must continue this conversation.